Sometimes one small act of kindness can change everything. This is the story of a broken old man, two forgotten children, and the shocking twist that no one saw coming. Stay with me until the end, because this story will stay in your heart forever. The winds of Milltown were cruel that winter. They cut through coats and boots like knives, forcing people to hunch their shoulders and hurry home before the cold swallowed them whole. Smoke from the steel plants hung thick and gray in the air, mixing with the biting frost, so heavy it made even the strongest men cough. Most people kept their eyes down. In a place like this, if you saw suffering, you pretended not to. If someone was left behind in an alley or doorway, you walked faster. That's how you survived. That's how you protected yourself. But not Samuel Carter. Samuel was a man in his late 50s. His back bent from decades of factory work. His left leg dragged with a limp that never quite healed from an accident in his youth. His skin was weathered, his hands rough, and his eyes carried the tired look of someone who had been fighting battles no one cared to notice. All his life, Samuel had worked in the steel mills. He gave his body to the machines, his lungs to the smoke, and his pride to men who thought themselves kings. The worst of them all was his boss, Raymond Harlan. Raymond never missed a chance to humiliate him. "You're too slow, Samuel. Too weak. Too useless." He would bark in front of the other workers, making them laugh. Samuel never fought back. He simply lowered his head, clenched his teeth, and kept working. Because answering back didn't pay the rent. Silence, he told himself, was cheaper than trouble. That evening, after another long shift, Samuel shuffled home through the icy streets. His breath rose in clouds, his leg ached with each step, and his stomach groaned with hunger. He was used to it by now. Used to going without. But then, in the narrow back alley behind a diner, he heard something. At first, he thought it was just the hum of the freezer fans, a steady whir against the wind. But then he caught sight of movement. He stopped. His tired eyes narrowed. There, huddled against a rusted dumpster, were two children. The boy, maybe 10 years old, clutched a little girl in his arms. She couldn't have been more than 6. Their clothes were nothing but rags, their skin pale from the cold, their eyes wide with fear and hunger. The boy tried to shield his sister, but his thin arms shivered uncontrollably. Samuel froze. His first thought was to keep walking. That's what everyone else would do. That's what survival in Milltown demanded. His boss's mocking voice even echoed in his head. "You can't even feed yourself, Carter. What business do you have worrying about anyone else?" But then the little girl opened her eyes. They were dull with exhaustion, but when she saw him, she stirred just enough to slip her tiny hand from her brother's grip and reach out toward Samuel. That single movement broke something inside him. He crouched down slowly, his knees crackling in protest. "Hey there," he whispered, his voice soft. "You two got anywhere to go?" The boy shook his head. His lips trembled, but no words came. Silence wrapped around them, heavy and cold. Until finally the girl's small, trembling hand touched Samuel's. And that was enough. Samuel's chest ached as he looked at them. He could have turned away. Could have let the world swallow them like it had swallowed so many others. But he couldn't. Not tonight. Not while those tiny fingers clung to his calloused palm. "Come on then," he murmured, helping them to their feet. "You'll freeze out here." When Samuel led the children back to his rundown apartment, the neighbors peeked from behind cracked doors. They whispered among themselves. "That fool. He can't even pay his own bills. Now he's dragging strays inside." Some chuckled, others shook their heads, convinced he was sealing his own downfall. Samuel heard them. Every word. But he kept walking. Inside, the apartment was drafty and bare. The wallpaper peeled, the floorboards creaked, and the radiator hissed weakly against the cold. Still, it was warmer than the alley. Samuel gathered the few blankets he owned and spread them on the couch. He poured water into a pot, dropped in a few scraps of vegetables, and warmed it into a thin broth. The children ate like they hadn't touched food in days. The boy tried to slow down to act polite, but hunger betrayed him. The girl, Clara, spooned the broth with shaking hands, her wide eyes darting between Samuel and her brother Daniel, as if unsure whether this kindness would last. Samuel sat quietly in the corner, rubbing his aching leg, watching them. The weight of tomorrow pressed heavy on his shoulders. He barely had enough for himself. How could he feed 2 more mouths? How could he protect them when he could hardly protect himself? But then, for the first time in years, his tiny apartment was filled with something different. Sound. Not the groan of pipes. Not the cough of his weary lungs. But the quiet, desperate slurping of children finally eating. And Samuel realized something. His life had been empty for so long, stripped of dignity, stripped of joy. But now, in this moment, watching 2 hungry children find warmth and safety, he felt a spark. It was fragile like a flame in the wind. But it was real. That night, after the children fell asleep curled together under the blankets, Samuel sat by the window, staring out at the frost creeping across the glass. He whispered to himself, half in prayer, half in fear, "Lord, what have I done?" He knew tomorrow would be harder than today. He knew the whispers would grow louder, the struggles sharper. But he also knew one thing for certain. Those children would never sleep on frozen concrete again. And that choice, born from nothing more than a trembling hand reaching out, would change everything. Morning crept into Milltown like an unwelcome guest. The sun barely broke through the smoke-stained skies, and the streets were already alive with the clang of metal and the hiss of steam. Samuel rose stiffly from his chair by the window, his joints aching from the cold. He hadn't slept much. Every time he closed his eyes, he heard the sound of children breathing softly in his small apartment, a reminder of the choice he had made. Clara stirred first, blinking up at him from beneath the threadbare blanket. Her small voice carried both fear and trust when she whispered, "Mister, are we safe here?" Samuel's chest tightened. He wanted to say yes with certainty, but the truth was heavier. He could hardly feed himself, and now he had 2 young souls depending on him. Still he forced a smile and nodded. "Safe as can be, sweetheart." Daniel woke next, ever cautious, scanning the room as though expecting someone to tear his world apart again. Samuel recognized that look. It was the same way he had scanned the factory floor for Raymond Harlan's shadow. A boy too young to carry so much fear already bore it like armor. The morning meal was meager. A heel of bread shared 3 ways. Samuel pretended not to be hungry, giving the children the larger bites. As he watched them chew slowly, trying to make the food last, something settled in him. These 2 had no one else. Whether he could manage or not, he was all they had now. By midday the whispers began. Milltown was a town of sharp eyes and sharper tongues. Word spread quickly that Samuel Carter had taken in 2 children. Some scoffed, others sneered. At the mill, Raymond wasted no time. "So it's true." Raymond's voice boomed across the floor, loud enough for every worker to hear. "Old Carter can't keep his own head above water, and now he's playing daddy to street rats?" Laughter rippled through the crew. Samuel's face burned, but he kept his head down, his hands steady on the furnace controls. Raymond smirked. "What's the matter, Carter? Got nothing to say? Or are you too busy dreaming of adoption papers and bedtime stories?" The men laughed harder. To them, Samuel's silence was weakness. But inside, Samuel's heart pounded with something else, anger. Not for himself, but for Clara and Daniel. He had endured decades of mockery, but he wouldn't allow those children to be reduced to a joke. That evening, when his shift ended, Samuel stepped outside into the freezing dusk. He expected to see no one waiting. But there they were, Clara and Daniel, bundled in oversized coats given by a kind neighbor, standing at the mill gates. Daniel lifted his chin. "We came to walk you home." Samuel stared at them, his throat thick. The world might mock him, his boss might belittle him, but here stood 2 children who believed in him, trusted him. And somehow, that trust felt heavier than any burden Raymond could throw his way. As they walked home together, Samuel noticed the way Clara hummed softly, her hand clutching his sleeve, and the way Daniel matched his steps like a soldier learning from his captain. They weren't just surviving anymore. They were clinging to the fragile beginning of something that resembled family. That night, Samuel lit the last of his candles and told the children a story. His voice was rough, unpracticed, but their eyes glowed in the flickering light as if he had given them a treasure. For the first time in years, Samuel Carter spoke not out of obligation, but out of care. And though the outside world sneered, inside those four crumbling walls, a different truth was taking shape. Samuel was no longer just a man beaten down by life. He was a protector, a guardian, a defiant whisper against the cruelty of Milltown. Winter tightened its grip on Milltown, turning every street into a battlefield of ice and smoke. For weeks, Samuel did everything he could to keep Clara and Daniel safe. He stretched every coin, worked every shift, and went without so they would not. The children grew stronger, their cheeks less hollow, their laughter returning in small bursts that lit up the dark corners of his apartment. But with their growth came heavier eyes upon him. The whispers around town sharpened into accusations. He's hiding something. Those brats will drag him down. It's not right, a man like him keeping kids that aren't his. One evening, after another punishing day at the mill, Samuel returned home to find two men in dark coats waiting outside his door. Their faces were hard, their voices colder than the frost. "We've heard about the children," one said. "Orphans, aren't they? They belong in the system, not with some washed-up mill worker." Samuel's stomach twisted. He stood tall, though his body ached. "They're not going anywhere." The men exchanged glances, unimpressed. "That's not for you to decide. You can't provide for them. Papers will be filed. They'll be taken." Inside, Clara clung to Daniel, wide-eyed and trembling. Samuel felt his heart tear. He had promised they would never sleep on concrete again. Now the threat loomed real and merciless. That night, after the men left with warnings of official visits, Samuel sat in silence. His rough hands trembled against his knees. Daniel finally broke the quiet. "You won't let them take us, will you?" Samuel met the boy's gaze. Fear stared back at him, but so did trust. That trust burned in Samuel's chest, fiercer than any furnace he had ever worked. "No," Samuel said, his voice breaking but steady. "Not while I draw breath." The days that followed tested him beyond measure. Raymond taunted him crueler than ever, sensing weakness. The neighbors avoided him, some out of fear, others out of scorn. The system closed in, paperwork and threats stacking higher than his strength. But Samuel refused to bend. He went without meals so the children could eat. He worked double shifts until his body nearly gave out. And when the men in coats returned with their cold demands, Samuel stood in their way, not as a broken worker, but as a father forged by choice, not blood. "You see a tired old man," he growled, his voice shaking the walls. "But these children see something else. They see safety. They see family. And I'll be damned if I let you take that from them." For a moment, the world held its breath. Clara's small hand gripped his. Daniel's chin lifted in quiet defiance. And in that fragile unity, Samuel realized something. He was no longer just surviving Milltown. He was fighting it, with every ounce of strength left in his bones. The men left that night, muttering about more paperwork, more hearings. The battle wasn't over. But Samuel had won something greater than victory. He had found a purpose. As he tucked the children into their blankets, Clara whispered, "I knew you wouldn't let them." Samuel's weary eyes softened. He kissed her forehead, his rough lips trembling against her skin. "No, sweetheart. Never." And in the flickering candlelight, Samuel Carter, once a forgotten man, mocked and broken, was something more. A guardian. A warrior. Father. The world could sneer, the system could fight, but nothing would undo the vow forged in a freezing alley. These children will never be alone again. The story of Samuel, Clara, and Daniel was only beginning. My friend, if this story touched your heart, don't just leave quietly. Share your thoughts in the comments, hit the like button, and subscribe for more stories of love, survival, and the courage to protect what truly matters.